this computer. Okay, we are live. All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in again. This is another series of interviews that Kennedy Financial Group is putting on. I'm Brandon Kennedy, the owner, lead advisor at Kennedy Financial, and I'm joined by Betsey Rubel today. Hi, Betsey. How you doing?
Hi, great. How are you?
Doing well. And I don't know if a lot of people know this. It seems like these holidays and months are kind of self-created, but October is estate planning month. So one of our core values is just to act with intention, and putting together an estate plan is certainly one of those things that it's not a fun topic to talk about. It's actually not even that urgent until it is, but it's incredibly important. So, we have a lot of conversations with clients about their legacy and what they leave behind, and kind of coming up with a greater purpose for their money, and having a proper estate plan that puts your wishes in place and covers the things that will eventually pass that money on to the next generation is incredibly important. So I'm very excited to have Betsey. Betsey has been an estate planning attorney that we've worked with. She's helped dozens and dozens of the clients that we've worked with. She's been doing this for about 20 years. She focuses her practice exclusively on estate planning and probate administration. So we're excited to have Betsey today, and we're going to talk about the 5 key areas in estate planning. So thanks, Betsey.
Yeah.
All right, so I'll kick us off with number 1. We'll kind of jump right into it, and that is, you recommend to have a comprehensive plan that's updated and reflects your current goals and wishes. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Sure. A lot of times a client will come to me and they maybe have some estate planning documents, and a lot of times they're 20 years old. They had little kids at the time, or perhaps weren't married at the time, or their situation was very different than it is today. So it's important to go back. Just because you did it once doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for the rest of your life. The documents don't necessarily, they're not void after a period of time, but they do require changes. So it's really important to make sure that you are reviewing these on a regular basis. What you needed 20 years ago might not be what you need now. So it's important just to make sure that you keep those updated. Usually an estate plan involves a will, generally a trust, power of attorney, a patient advocate designation. And then in addition to that, making sure all of your other assets are coordinated with your estate plan to kind of, cover everything and comprehensively in terms of your assets.
Sure. No, I mean, often we've run into trusts where, they had somebody who's even deceased that's a trustee still on there, right? Or their wishes were in place, and maybe they've changed a little bit and they want to pass money on differently. So what's maybe a rule of thumb to review an estate plan?
I usually say like every 5 to 7 years, unless there's a major change in life events, a marriage, a divorce, birth of a child, major change in assets. Those are some triggers that might even cause you to look at it sooner than the 5 to 7 year mark. It may be that there's no changes after 5 or 7 years, but it's just a good time to take a look at it again, just to make sure everything is where it needs to be. A lot of times people kind of forget what they put in their estate plan. You put it in a drawer, you forget about it. So it's just important to be cognizant of any changes that might need to be made.
Okay, excellent. All right, let's jump into number 2, funding and beneficiary designations. Can you tell us about the importance of?
Sure. This is a big one. When somebody has a trust is just a piece of paper essentially that states what you want to happen to your assets. So the important piece after drafting a trust is to actually transfer your assets into that trust, which is called funding. Because if you don't do that, then the trust doesn't own the things that you're trying to distribute. So it's important to look at all the assets you have. There are different ways of funding different types of assets into a trust, which is why it's important to talk to an attorney, talk to your financial advisor, make sure that those funding changes are made. Same thing with a beneficiary designation. Oftentimes, somebody opens an account, they name someone as a beneficiary, and they forget about it. I see a lot of people who maybe got their first 401k when they started their first job, and they name their parents or a sibling as beneficiary. They've since been married, have kids, things change. You need to make sure that you're going back and reviewing those beneficiary designations. So all of your documents and assets are coordinated together, and they're all kind of funneling to the same to your same beneficiaries that you choose.
No, that's great. Hey, can you talk about it? Because I know we've run into this before, and you've helped a lot of our clients. But what is that process for making sure that your plan is updated, that it's funded
Mhm.
correctly? How do you help clients in the real world on addressing
Sure.
those things?
So yeah, when I meet with a client initially, I have them fill out an estate planning questionnaire so I can identify all the assets they have. And then when we meet to sign their documents, I provide them with a to-do list that goes through exactly everything they own and what to do with it. For example, like your house generally is transferred into a trust, a bank account can be retitled into a trust, but things like life insurance, 401ks, IRAs, those types of assets are not transferred into a trust, but oftentimes the trust is named somewhere in the beneficiary designation, and that's going to be a client by client basis depending on their assets and their needs. But that's generally the process. I work with people to make that happen because it can be kind of confusing. But I usually do like a color coded to-do list that tells you exactly go to this bank, do this. You request a beneficiary designation. This is how you fill it out. And I help people with it. But it's something that you need to make sure you've kind of hit every asset so nothing slips through and ends up in probate. It's really the goal.
Yep. No, and I've seen people come in who say, "Hey, here's my trust. Everything's all set," and they didn't fund any of it, and basically they
Yeah,
just had a couple of $1,000 piece of paper, which is
exactly.
unfortunate. So, all
Yeah.
right, great stuff on that. So let's jump into number three.
Mhm.
Once we have the documents done, the timing of executing these documents, can you tell us about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's really important to get it done in terms of signing documents when you're able to. A lot of times, I'll get a call from somebody who has an elderly parent who maybe is in early stages of dementia, and they want to have some changes made, or maybe perhaps they never had any documents. At some point, it becomes too late to sign documents because you have to have the capacity to sign legal documents. So I've had several. I had one recently where you are trying to sign something and you can tell that that person doesn't have the capacity to sign, and you're not able to go ahead and do that. So it's important to take care of these things, on the front end, so you don't end up like rushing around or having an issue where you can't sign something when you're in the middle of a crisis. So it's much better to deal with it at this point. It's often on people's to-do lists, but it kind of goes a little bit far down sometimes because people don't want to think about it. But now really is the time to get it done, so you're not doing it in the middle of a crisis situation.
Okay, very good, very good. All right, number four. This is changing gears a little bit, but you've got a tip for an estate planning don't, something to consider. Tell us about that.
Yep. Yeah. Don't get documents off the internet. That's it seems like common sense, but there's so many websites out there that are where you can purchase for a small fee different documents. But the problem is it's not an attorney that's preparing these specifically for you. That the internet doesn't know you, and when you do it that way, there is the risk that you could, something could go very wrong with those documents, especially in terms of funding. If you think you're just pulling a trust offline and you're just going to sign it and be done with it, it's really not going to do anything unless you transfer the assets into it. And not meeting with an attorney who knows the law in your state, who can ask questions to get at exactly what your wishes are and identify potential issues. That's what you miss when you're doing something online, when you're just pulling off a document. So I think it's really important to meet with an attorney just to, as I always ask a lot of questions of my clients to get at, potential conflicts between any family members, if you have any children with disabilities or beneficiaries with disabilities, any liability issues. There's lots of different things that I need to kind of gain from my client that comes from a conversation. And that's how I base the drafting of my document. So by just pulling something off the internet, you miss out on that, and there's the potential for problems down the road.
Yeah, and just from experience and hearing from clients, someone like Betsy and just the wise counsel, she acts as a sounding board. She really takes the time to make this document what you want it to be. It's not just a transaction to her, and that goes a long way. And kind of leads into our last tip, number five, which is why we do all of this, and certainly why we probably don't want to save a little bit of money on the front end. Talk about avoiding probate. That's tip number five.
Yeah, so that's often one of the primary reasons somebody drafts an estate plan. In addition to making sure your wishes are followed, obviously that's that's the big thing here. But avoiding probate is why somebody makes sure that they either have a trust or they have beneficiary designations on their assets. Because what probate is the court, probate court. It's a process if you die owning something in your own name. In order for that asset then to transfer to whoever you want it to transfer, you would have to go through probate court to have that happen when you don't have something that's already in a trust or does not have a beneficiary designation. So most people want to avoid probate because first of all, it's time consuming. It's a filing of forms, potentially going to court, getting court approval for different transfers, and it can be expensive because oftentimes you have to hire an attorney to do it. You pay an inventory fee based on a percentage of your assets. So it just adds an extra wrinkle to something when people don't want to be dealing with that. You're grieving the loss of a loved one. The last thing you want to do is get the court involved. So by making sure that your estate plan is done and funded properly, you can avoid all that hassle, and it can just be a private administration that your family can take care of, and you don't need the courts involved in it.
Great stuff. So there's, this is again, another core value that we have is make the complex simple. Estate planning,
Mhm.
not necessarily simple, but if you go through the process, you make it a priority. The peace of mind and the weight that's lifted off your shoulders is pretty
Mhm.
significant. So if people wanted to reach out and look at their estate that they have in place, or maybe they have nothing and they want to talk with you and look at those next steps, how do they reach out to you and make that connection?
Sure. Well, I have a website, which is elisabethjrubel.com, that has all of my contact information. But I'm happy to sit down with any clients. I always do an initial free consultation where I can take a look at what you have and kind of go from there. But what you were saying too, Brandon, is really one of the most rewarding parts of my job is that this is something that people put off for so long, and they usually feel so good about it when it's done. So like you said, it's not necessarily simple, but I strive to make the process as simple as we can so people understand what they're doing and they feel good about it. And that's really the number one thing comment I get after we're done is like, wow, this feels really good to have this done. Like I check that box, I know things are set up properly. And so that's really the benefit of like checking that box, getting it done. And the process really is not too bad, and it does feel good when it's done.
No, for sure. It's one of those that it's once it's off your plate, you realize, oh, I should have done this
Yeah.
for some people years and years ago. So yeah, I encourage you, if this is, you kind of got to the end of the year, if it's one of those things that's a priority, reach out, you can get it done, have it in place, and move into 2021 with some peace of mind. So Betsy, I want to thank you for today. This was great. These just timeless tips on making sure we're doing this. Appreciate your time, and thanks so much.
Yeah. Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks so much. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye bye.